America spent years planning its 250th birthday. The parade in Washington was canceled the day before, not by a protest, not by a security threat, by air. And while the bleachers on Constitution Avenue sat empty, the operator of the country's largest power grid was asking 67 million people to please voluntarily use less electricity. Wholesale power in New England cost nearly 3.5 times what it had a few days earlier. By Saturday morning, 800,000 homes had none at all. Here's the strange part. All of it was in the forecast a week early. The grid saw the most predictable disaster in America coming, and its best remaining tool was begging. Friday morning, July 3rd, the National Weather Service has 185 million Americans under heat alerts, more than half the country. A dome of high pressure is parked over the eastern United States, trapping hot air like a lid on a pot. Heat indexes are forecast to reach 115 degrees Fahrenheit, 46 Celsius, and the nights are staying hot too, which matters more than it sounds. The human body does its recovering after dark. By evening, the cancellations are rolling in. The National Park Service calls off the Independence Day Parade in Washington, a centerpiece of the country's 250th anniversary. Philadelphia cancels its salute to independence. The fair on the National Mall closes as the thermometer passes 1001. Boston pushes back the gates to its fireworks by 4 hours. Underneath the ceremonies, the machine is straining. PJM, the largest grid operator in the country, 67 million people, orders customers in its emergency programs to cut usage, generators failing, transmission lines overloaded, air conditioning demand surging. Wholesale electricity jumps 243% in New England, 101% in New York City. The Department of Energy orders generators in the strained region, including backup units, to run flat out for the second time this summer. Amtrak slows its trains so the rails don't buckle. By Saturday morning, roughly 800,000 customers have no power. In Pennsylvania, officials link at least one death to the heat. The coverage wrote itself: record temperatures, aging infrastructure, climate again. But set the thermometer aside, because the strangest fact is this: nothing about last week was a surprise. The forecast was public 7 days out. Heat is the deadliest weather in America. Most years, it kills more people than hurricanes, floods, and tornadoes combined, and it's also the slowest disaster we have, the only one that sends a save the date. And still, the response is the same ritual every time: emergency orders, conservation appeals, blackouts. 2021, Texas; 2022, California; 2023, the Southwest, now the East. The dates change, the script doesn't. When a system fails the same way, on schedule, with advance notice, that's not weather, that's design. Start with the machine's one impossible rule. Electricity at grid scale is barely stored. Supply has to equal demand every second of every day. The grid is a market with no warehouse. So how do you design for that? You build for the peak, the single hottest hour of the single hottest afternoon of the year. Whole power plants exist to run a few dozen hours annually, waiting for that hour. Everything else, wires, transformers, reserve margins, is sized to the same worst case, which works as long as you guess the worst case right. Those numbers were calibrated on the climate of the past century. A heat dome doesn't just push demand up, it pushes it past the design assumption, and then it does something sneakier. Transformers are built to cool off at night. When nights stay hot, the equipment never recovers, and failures climb exactly when the system can least afford them. That's the generator outages line in PJM's Friday order. Now look at the other half of the market, because this is where the defect lives. When power gets scarce, the wholesale price screams. In Texas, it can go from $40 a megawatt hour to $5,000. That price is the system saying precisely and in real time, there isn't enough, use less, or use it later. Then the signal reaches the retail meter and dies. The overwhelming majority of American households pay a flat rate set months in advance. On the hottest afternoon of the year, their electricity costs exactly what it costs on a mild Tuesday in April. So demand doesn't flinch. It can't. It never hears the scream. Worse, as the temperature rises, every air conditioner works harder. Demand climbs at precisely the moment the system needs it to fall. Delete the price signal, and what's left? An operator with three tools: begging, the conservation appeals, commanding the federal order to run everything flat out, and rationing, rolling blackouts, scarcity handed out by lottery instead of by choice. Picture a supermarket that prints its prices once a year. The day the harvest fails, there is no way to say, take less, there isn't enough. The shelves just go empty. That's not a metaphor for the grid, that's the wiring diagram. 3 systems decided the emergency was optional. 3 different bets. In Britain, an energy company called Octopus runs a tariff called Agile. The household price changes every 30 minutes, following the wholesale market, published a day in advance. Customers shift what can move: laundry, dishwashers, car charging, into the cheap hours. Sometimes the price goes negative and they're paid to consume. A cap of £1 per kilowatt hour keeps a crisis from bankrupting anyone. The point isn't the gadgets, it's that a few million households become, in aggregate, a power plant that runs on restraint. Analysts at the Brattle Group put America's untapped demand flexibility near 200 gigawatts, roughly a fifth of summer peak. The trade-off is real, and Texas already ran the experiment. In the February 2021 freeze, customers on wholesale index plans received electric bills in the thousands of dollars. Dynamic pricing moves risk from the utility to the household, and the 80-year-old on a respirator at 3 p.m. cannot shift her load. Price can be a layer, it cannot be the only layer. France's answer wasn't about the grid at all, it was about the deaths. August 2003, a 2-week heat wave killed roughly 15,000 people in France, most of them elderly, alone, in apartments nobody checked. The country responded the way you respond to losing a war. The Plan Canicule, 4 national alert levels, city registries of isolated elderly, mandatory check-in calls, cool rooms, and at the top level, the Prime Minister's office running the machine. 16 years later, the summer of 2019 was hotter, an all-time record of 46 degrees, and the death toll came in 90% lower. The trade-off: it's a standing bureaucracy for an event that might not come, it saves people, not power lines, and it assumes a centralized state. A federation of 50 states and 3,000 counties is different hardware. And Seville went after something softer: attention. In 2022, it became the first city on Earth to name heat waves the way we name hurricanes. The first was Zoe, with categories tied to forecast impact and the top categories triggering protocols automatically. Miami, Los Angeles, Milwaukee, and Kansas City are running pilots. Some cities have appointed chief heat officers. The trade-off is obvious. A name is a communication layer, not a plan. Without something like the Plan Canicule underneath it, it's marketing. Meteorologists are split for a reason. Wire the price to the thermostat. Wire the state to the vulnerable. Wire the forecast to a protocol. None of them prevents a heat dome. All of them decide in advance what happens when one arrives. The heat dome will lift, the bills will arrive, the outage maps will turn green again, and the 250th birthday will be remembered as the one with the empty bleachers. But notice how you'd find out next time. Not from the price. That signal dies at your meter. You'd find out from a push notification begging you to conserve an hour before the lights flicker. The most instrumented machine on the continent reduced to asking nicely. The next heat dome is already scheduled, not on a date, but statistically as surely as the next earthquake under an unenforced building code. So the question isn't whether the grid can survive the weather. It's simpler than that. When the air over your city stops moving for a week, does your system already know what to do? Or is it right now planning to be surprised?